Before start this heartwarming story, please tell us in the comment box, where are you watching from? We'd love to hear that from you. The rain battered the broken windows of Zara Breeze's tiny apartment, each drop sounding like a cruel reminder of how empty her life had become. At just 20 years old, she was already suffocating under a mountain of debts left by parents who had loved her fiercely, but left her nothing but memories. Each night, as she lay on the worn-out mattress with a threadbare blanket clutched to her chest, Zara wondered if the next knock on the door would be her eviction notice. Every creak in the hallway, every loud voice outside her window made her heart race in terror. She worked 3 jobs, she skipped meals, she sold her mother's necklace, the only piece of jewelry she had ever owned. And still, it was never enough. On the other side of the glittering skyline, far above her dark world, Charles Robert lived in a reality most could only dream of. The penthouse king, the CEO of Robert Enterprises, a man who built empires with a single phone call, a man whose name commanded respect and fear alike. But tonight, even Charles sat alone in his lavish office, staring at the city lights with a frown creasing his perfect brow. Time was slipping through his fingers like sand. His grandfather, the only man who had ever loved him without expecting anything in return, was dying, and his last wish was a demand. Marry. Marry a pure-hearted woman, or lose everything to vipers waiting to tear the company apart. Charles didn't believe in love. He believed in deals, contracts, power, and so, like any business transaction, he ordered his legal team to find him a wife. No scandals, no lies, no broken past. And that's when Zara's name surfaced. A girl too poor to be corrupted, too desperate to say no. A pawn for a king. Their first meeting was colder than winter winds. Zara entered the marble lobby of Robert Enterprises wearing a borrowed dress, her hands shaking so violently that the receptionist offered her water without a word. When Charles first laid eyes on her, something unexpected stirred inside him. She wasn't like the polished heiresses that usually crowded his parties. She had no diamonds, no painted smiles, only wide, fearful brown eyes and a soul too raw for this world. She smelled like rain and soap, honest things. He hated honesty. It was too dangerous. Still, Charles gestured for her to sit, his voice a blade wrapped in velvet. "You understand what this arrangement is?" he asked, his gray eyes narrowing. Zara nodded, throat dry. She had no choice. This was her only chance to claw herself out of the pit she was drowning in. The terms were laid out between them on thick, expensive paper. No intimacy, no emotions, 1 year only, $5 million upon completion, no love, no messy feelings, just a contract signed in the shadows. Zara hesitated, the pen hovering above the paper. Her mind raced. Was she selling her soul? Was she about to chain herself to a man colder than winter for a year? But then she thought of the landlord pounding on her door, of the electricity bill she couldn't pay, of the empty pantry that would stay empty without a miracle. Her hand trembled, but she finally pressed the pen to the paper. Each letter of her name felt like carving her heart out. Zara Breeze. Across the table, Charles watched her with a gaze that could burn mountains. He told himself it was just relief. Just business, nothing more. But deep inside, something unspoken shifted. An obsession bloomed, silent, dark, and unstoppable. He noticed the way her lashes fluttered when she tried not to cry, the way her small hands fought to steady themselves, the fierce pride she had, even while signing away a year of her life. She's not weak, he thought. She's strong enough to survive me. When Zara finally lifted her eyes to meet his, she expected coldness. Instead, she found something far more dangerous. Possession. Not the cruel, arrogant ownership she feared, but something deeper, something almost reverent. As if, in that moment, Charles Robert didn't see a contract. He saw a girl he could destroy without ever laying a hand on her. And the terrifying truth was, he didn't want to destroy her. He wanted to protect her, even if it meant tearing the world apart. Without a word, Charles stood and extended his hand. Zara stared at it, heart thundering against her ribs. This wasn't just a handshake. This was the first step into a life she could barely imagine. and a life from which there would be no escape. Slowly, almost against her will, she placed her small hand into his larger one. His fingers closed around hers with shocking gentleness, as if she were made of glass. "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Robert," he said, his voice low, almost a promise, not knowing that even the iron contract between them could never cage what was about to be born, not knowing that the walls he built around his heart were already beginning to crack because of her. And Zara, innocent Zara, had no idea that she wasn't just signing a deal to survive. She was signing her way into the most dangerous, beautiful, and heart-wrenching love story she could have ever imagined. The deal was signed, the shadows were set, and fate, watching from above, smiled softly, because the true battle hadn't even begun yet. The morning of the wedding was gray and bitter, as if the sky itself mourned what was about to happen. Zara Breeze stood alone in a cramped dressing room of the city's most prestigious hotel, staring at her reflection. The simple white dress draped over her slender frame like a whisper of something sacred, something already broken. It wasn't the elaborate gown little girls dreamed of. No glittering veil, no trembling hands pinning heirloom jewels in her hair. Just her, just Zara. There was no one to zip the back of her dress, no soft voices telling her she was beautiful, no laughter, no happy tears, only the heavy silence of a girl about to sign her soul away. This time, not with ink, but with vows spoken before strangers. Meanwhile, across the hall, Charles Robert adjusted his black tuxedo in front of a tall mirror. He looked devastatingly handsome, a man carved from marble and power. But inside, a storm was brewing, his jaw locked tighter with every passing second. This wasn't a wedding. It was a transaction, a necessity. At least that's what he kept telling himself. When Zara entered the grand ballroom, heads turned, not out of awe but curiosity. Who was this unknown girl marrying Manhattan's most unattainable king? The hall was vast, cold, and glittered with hollow opulence. Gold chandeliers swung lazily overhead. Rows of faceless guests, more business associates than family, sat stiffly in pews, whispering behind manicured hands. No one clapped. No one smiled. Zara's hands trembled as she walked down the endless aisle alone, clutching a small bouquet of wilting lilies. Each step echoed like a heartbeat against the marble floors. And at the end of the aisle, waiting like a dark sentinel, stood Charles. Expression unreadable, eyes stormy. When their gazes met, 1,000 unsaid words crackled in the air. He offered his arm, stiff and formal, and Zara took it, feeling his strength like an iron wall beside her own fragile frame. The priest's voice boomed through the cold hall. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Zara barely heard the words. The room swam. Her knees shook under her dress. But she stood tall, out of pure stubbornness. The only thing her parents ever left her. When it came time to speak their vows, Charles recited his lines perfectly, emotionless, as if reading a contract. Zara's voice wavered, but she forced herself through the promises, swallowing the lump in her throat. "And now," the priest said solemnly, "you may kiss the bride." The words hung between them like a dare. The world seemed to slow. Zara's heart hammered wildly in her chest, every muscle in her body tensed in panic. Charles stepped closer, so close she could smell the faint scent of his cologne. Crisp, expensive, utterly intoxicating. His hands reached up, brushing a lock of hair away from her face. For a terrible, breathtaking moment, she thought he was going to claim her mouth right there in front of everyone. Own her. Seal the deal with fire and steel. But at the last second, Charles did something no one expected, not even himself. He leaned in, and with the softest touch, pressed his lips against her forehead. A kiss not of possession, but of protection. The ballroom seemed to shudder under the weight of that gesture. The whispers grew louder. Charles pulled back, his expression still locked in ice, but his eyes, his storm gray eyes, burned with something Zara didn't understand. Tenderness, regret, hunger. The ceremony ended in a blur of meaningless handshakes and fake smiles. Photographers captured their stiff poses, their carefully neutral expressions. The media would call it the wedding of the decade, but Zara knew better. It was a transaction, a performance. A beautiful, glittering lie. By the time they climbed into the sleek black limousine, the tension between them was a living thing, crawling across the leather seats. Zara sat rigid, her hands clutched in her lap. Charles stared out the window, jaw working, silent and brooding. The city flashed by, all glitter and neon, as they drove toward the penthouse that would be their shared prison. When they finally arrived, Charles swept open the car door and offered his hand, his touch both firm and unbearably gentle. Without a word, he led her through a lobby dripping with luxury, up a private elevator that soared into the clouds. The penthouse was breathtaking. Walls of glass overlooked the entire city. Marble floors stretched endlessly underfoot. Priceless art hung from every corner. But Zara felt none of its beauty, only the crushing weight of being alone in a stranger's fortress. Charles showed her to her room first, a beautiful, untouched suite down the hall from his. 2 bedrooms, 2 lives, 2 strangers bound by invisible chains. Zara stood at the threshold of her room, clutching the small suitcase she had brought. Charles lingered in the hallway, his posture tense, as if he were battling something unseen inside himself. "Good night, Zara," he said, voice low and rough. She nodded silently and slipped inside, closing the door between them with a soft click that sounded suspiciously like a prison cell locking shut. Hours passed. Zara lay on the impossibly soft bed, staring at the high ceiling, listening to the strange noises of a world too rich for her to understand. She didn't cry. She didn't break. She had made her choice, and now she would live with it. But what Zara didn't know, what she couldn't possibly guess, was that Charles Robert was standing on the other side of her door. For hours, his fists clenched at his sides, his body humming with a strange, painful ache he had never known before. A hunger not of the flesh, though God knew he wanted her, but of something deeper, something far more dangerous. He wanted to know the girl who slept only feet away, wanted to tear down the walls she had built around her fragile heart, wanted to pull her into his world and never let her go. And for the first time in his ruthless life, Charles Robert realized he had made a deal with the devil. Because somewhere between the ink and the vows, he had signed away far more than his freedom. He had signed away his heart, and he didn't even know it yet. The first weeks passed in heavy, awkward silence. Like 2 strangers trapped inside a glass cage, Zara and Charles lived under the same soaring ceilings, breathed the same rarefied air, but barely touched each other's worlds. She tiptoed around him. He buried himself in work. Zara woke up early, moving through the penthouse like a ghost, making coffee, folding blankets, straightening papers he left behind without complaint. Somehow the routines of caring for a man who never asked for anything became the only rhythm she knew. Charles, in return, treated her like a shadow, present but untouched. At night, he came home late. The glow of his office seeped under his door like a reminder. Work mattered. She did not. At least that's what they both pretended. Because in the quiet moments when he thought she wasn't looking, Charles found his gaze drawn to her, to the way she tucked her hair behind her ear whenever she was nervous, to the small, careful frowns she wore when she read grocery receipts, worrying about spending too much, to the softness in her laugh, rare, precious, like sunlight breaking through thick clouds. And Zara, for all her stubborn pride, noticed him too. Not the ruthless billionaire the tabloids gossiped about, not the cold, perfect CEO whose photos adorned business magazines, but the man who sometimes stood by the window late at night, whiskey glass untouched in his hand, staring out into the darkness with a loneliness so deep it bled into the walls. It wasn't love yet. It wasn't even friendship. It was something slower, something heavier, like 2 halves of a broken bridge, daring to stretch toward each other. But all that changed one rainy Thursday evening. The storm raged outside, rattling the windows with angry fists. Zara, determined to make something nice for dinner, anything to fill the cavernous silence of their home, decided to cook. She wasn't great at it, but she tried. She always tried. In the process, a small accident happened. The oil in the pan hissed violently, and before Zara could move away, a splash of it kissed her hand. A sharp, burning sting. She gasped, biting down a cry, tears welling up in her wide eyes. She stumbled to the sink, running cold water over the burn, but the pain throbbed relentlessly. And that's when Charles walked in. He had come home early for once, exhausted, head aching. But the moment he saw her standing there, cradling her injured hand, everything else evaporated. Without a word, Charles was at her side. He didn't hesitate. Strong hands, hands used to signing contracts, crushing rivals, were suddenly shaking as they gently took her wrist. He pulled her hand into his, inspecting the reddening skin with a fierce, silent intensity. "Why didn't you call me?" His voice was low, raw, almost accusing. Zara blinked up at him, surprised by the tremor in his voice. I, I didn't want to bother you," she whispered. A muscle ticked in Charles's jaw. Without releasing her, he guided her to a chair, grabbed a bag of ice from the freezer, and carefully pressed it against her burn. His touch was so delicate, it broke something inside Zara she hadn't known was still intact. She stared at him, wide-eyed. The CEO, the titan, the untouchable Charles Robert, was treating her like something precious, like something he couldn't afford to break. His hands shook slightly as he held the ice in place. The silence between them roared louder than any storm outside. She could feel the storm inside him too, raging, struggling, desperate. "She's not just a contract," something deep in Charles's chest screamed. "She's mine." Zara felt her cheeks heat up, not from the injury, but from the way his thumb brushed over the back of her hand. Absent-minded, almost reverent. Neither of them spoke. The walls they had built so carefully, so cruelly, began to crumble. Not with a crash, but with the soft, unbearable weight of tenderness. From that night on, things shifted. Charles found himself noticing everything about her. The way she left little notes on the fridge, reminding him to eat. The way she hummed under her breath when she thought she was alone. The way she curled up with old cartoons on the couch, giggling in a way that made his chest ache with a strange, savage need to protect her from the world. Sometimes he would stand hidden in the hallway, just watching her laugh. A real laugh, not one forced by pain or fear. He realized he would burn the world to ashes if it meant keeping that smile on her face. And Zara began to see past the polished suits and sharp words, past the brutal reputation. In the quiet spaces he didn't realize he exposed, she saw a man haunted by loneliness. A boy who had grown up too fast, too hard, carrying the weight of empires on his back without anyone to hold him steady. One night she caught him asleep on the couch, papers slipping from his hands, exhaustion written across his beautiful, tired face. Without thinking, she pulled a blanket over him, careful not to wake him. And when he stirred, blinking up at her with sleepy confusion, Zara smiled. Soft, gentle, unbearably kind. "Sleep," she whispered. And he did. For the first time in years, Charles Robert slept deeply, peacefully, guarded not by locks or contracts, but by the silent presence of a girl who didn't even realize she was already breaking down every defense he had. Piece by fragile piece, the walls between them crumbled. And somewhere in the ruins, something dangerous, beautiful, and utterly unstoppable began to grow. The storm outside wasn't half as wild as the storm building inside Zara's chest that night. The grand ballroom of Manhattan's elite gala glittered with crystal chandeliers and golden laughter. Women in gowns whispered behind champagne flutes. Men in tailored suits talked in low, self-important voices. And in the middle of it all stood Zara Breeze, awkward, beautiful, and breathtakingly out of place. Her pale blue dress hugged her slim figure. Her hair was swept back with trembling fingers, and her heart hammered so loudly in her chest she was sure everyone could hear it. Beside her, Charles Robert looked every bit the king of the room, sharp black tuxedo, cold gray eyes, commanding presence that made people part like waves whenever he walked past. Tonight was supposed to be just another charade, another performance. Smile, nod, pretend. But fate had other plans. She saw him out of the corner of her eye first, a shadow from her past. Mr. Dalton, a creditor from her darkest days. The man who had laughed in her face when she begged for time to pay her dead parents' debts. Before she could slip away, he was there, drunk, angry, and reeking of cheap whiskey. Well, well, if it isn't the little poor rat, Dalton sneered, his voice carrying too far, slicing through the music and chatter like a knife. Look at you now. Sold yourself to a rich fool, did you? The room stilled. Hundreds of glittering, judging eyes turned toward her. Zara's cheeks flamed scarlet, her vision blurred. Her hands, her poor trembling hands, clutched at the thin silk of her dress, willing herself not to collapse right there on the marble floor. She opened her mouth to deny it, to explain she didn't even know, but no words came out. She felt so small, so exposed, like a cracked doll dropped in the middle of a perfect, cruel world. But then, he was there. Charles. Like a thunderclap breaking the silence, Charles stormed forward. No hesitation, no mercy. He grabbed Dalton by the collar of his wrinkled jacket, lifting the man half off the ground with terrifying ease. The entire room gasped, a collective intake of breath. Charles's voice was low, deadly, carrying to every corner of the stunned hall. "This is Mrs. Robert," he said, each word a dagger. "My wife. Disrespect her, and you disrespect me." Dalton's face turned a sickly shade of white. He stammered, but Charles didn't even look at him again. He tossed the man aside like trash. And then, the most shocking thing of all, he turned, took Zara's trembling hand in his, and pulled her against his chest protectively. Not just for the crowd, not for show, for her. The room, already frozen, seemed to dissolve around them. Zara stared up at him, breathless, her heart cracking open in her chest. He didn't say another word. He just led her away from the ballroom, out into the stormy night, into the sleek black car waiting for them. The ride home was silent, but not cold. It was a silence thick with words they hadn't yet dared to say. When they reached the penthouse, Zara couldn't hold it anymore. The moment the elevator doors closed behind them, she broke down. Her knees gave out. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, spilled down her cheeks. Charles caught her before she hit the floor, scooping her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He carried her into the living room, setting her gently onto the couch. Then he knelt before her, the mighty Charles Robert, kneeling before a girl who had nothing to offer but her heart. "I'm sorry," Zara choked out between sobs. "I didn't marry you for your money. I swear I just wanted to survive. I had no one. I didn't mean to bring shame." "Zara," Charles cut her off, voice thick, rough, barely human. She wouldn't meet his eyes. So he reached up, cupping her face between his hands. Large, warm, shaking hands that trembled with everything he was feeling and couldn't say. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to look at him. Her tear-streaked face shattered him. "I know," he said, his voice a raw whisper. Three simple words that burned deeper than any long speech ever could. "I know." Zara's lips parted in shock, her tears slowing. He smiled then, a small, broken smile, like a man finally setting down a burden he had carried alone for far too long. "And that's why," he paused, swallowing hard, gray eyes boring into hers, "that's why I'm falling in love with you." The world stopped spinning, the storm outside, the storm inside her. Everything froze. Zara's heart nearly stopped. She stared at him, searching his face for a lie, for a cruel joke. But all she found was brutal, beautiful truth. Charles wasn't pretending. He wasn't lying. The cold, untouchable man she had married for survival was in love with her. Not because of pity, not because of obligation, but because somewhere along the line, without even realizing it, he had started seeing her. Really seeing her. The girl who smiled even when life kicked her down. The girl who burned her hands trying to cook him dinner. The girl who didn't want his money, his empire, only his heart. And Charles realized, with a quiet, terrifying certainty, that there was no going back now. No business deal, no corporate ambition, no cold logic. He was hers, completely, irrevocably. And as Zara leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his, their tears mixing, their breaths tangling, they both knew the contract might have brought them together. But love was about to tear down every wall they had ever built, forever. After that stormy night when hearts collided and secrets broke free, Everything between Zara and Charles changed. No more pretending. No more cold walls. The powerful CEO, who once buried himself in endless contracts and cold logic, now wore his heart openly. For one woman. For Zara Breeze. Each morning Zara woke not to emptiness, but to small miracles. A tray by her bedside, warm pancakes, scrambled eggs, and fresh berries. Meals Charles awkwardly tried to cook himself because he refused to let the staff do it. Little handwritten notes tucked beside the plates. Smile for me today. You're the best part of my world. I can't wait to see you at dinner. Zara would clutch the notes against her chest, heart trembling, afraid it was all just a beautiful dream she would one day wake from. Charles wasn't showering her with luxury cars or oceans of diamonds. Instead, he noticed the small things that mattered. The way she once mentioned loving the smell of lavender, and now fresh lavender filled every corner of the penthouse. The way she adored fairy tales. So he built her a private little library filled with worn, beautiful books he hunted down himself. The way she shyly admitted she missed her mother's simple, home-cooked meals. So Charles spent entire weekends learning to cook, burning dinners, laughing when they had to order pizza instead. He started canceling business trips, shocking his board members. He stayed home to cook clumsy pasta with her. He stayed home to watch old cartoons, their laughter echoing off the marble walls. He stayed home because Zara had become home, and every glance between them grew heavier. Every brush of his hand against hers, every lingering look across a crowded room, every soft, stolen smile. It became impossible to ignore. Their bond was no longer a silent agreement. It was alive, breathing, dangerously close to consuming them both. But inside Zara's fragile heart, a war raged. He deserves better, she thought miserably. Charles Robert was a man born to conquer skyscrapers, command empires, rule cities. And she was just a girl who had once begged on the streets, worn shoes with holes, cried herself to sleep in cold, empty rooms. No matter how brightly he smiled at her, no matter how fiercely he held her, Zara couldn't shake the gnawing fear. I'm not enough for him. I'll ruin him. And so, one quiet afternoon, when Charles was away at a meeting, Zara made a decision. Her hands shook as she packed her small suitcase. A few clothes, her favorite book Charles had given her. Nothing else. Tears blurred her vision as she scribbled a note with trembling fingers. You deserve someone who can stand beside you. Someone worthy. I'll always love you from afar. She left the note on his pillow, where his head would have rested that night beside hers, and walked out the door. Out into the gray, drizzling afternoon. The bus station smelled like rain and loneliness. Zara sat on the bench, clutching her suitcase, feeling every beat of her heart echo in her empty hands. The sky poured cold drops on her thin jacket, but she didn't move. She would survive. She had always survived, even if it meant living the rest of her life aching for a man she would never hold again. But across Manhattan, Charles Robert read her note. And the moment his eyes scanned those broken words, something inside him snapped. No, he would not lose her. Not to fear, not to shame, not to the lies she told herself. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He ran. Through crowded sidewalks, past confused security guards, across slick, rain-slick streets. He found her, just as the bus pulled up with a roar of brakes and hissing doors. Zara stood to leave, but a voice, raw, desperate, shattered the rainy air. Zara! She spun around, and there he was, Charles Robert, the man who once ruled empires with cold, ruthless power, now falling to his knees on the filthy, soaked pavement, in front of a dozen strangers, in front of the whole damn city, kneeling for her. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead. His expensive suit was ruined. His heart was wide open, bleeding for everyone to see. You're my everything, he shouted, voice breaking. I don't care about the contract. I don't care about anything. Tears blurred Zara's eyes so badly she almost missed the moment he crawled forward on his knees, grabbing her small, trembling hands. I care about you, he gasped. I love you, he said louder, as if daring the whole world to hear. I love you. I love you, Zara Breeze, and I don't care if the world burns. The people around them whispered. Some cheered softly. Some wiped at their eyes, but Zara heard none of it. All she heard was his voice. Broken. Beautiful. Real. She dropped her suitcase with a thud. She fell to her knees in front of him. And then Charles wrapped his arms around her. So tightly, so fiercely. Like if he let go, even for a second, he might lose her forever. The rain washed over them, blurring the city lights into soft smears of gold and gray. Zara buried her face against his chest, sobbing, laughing, trembling. I'm sorry, she whispered. I love you too. Charles lifted her face with shaking hands. He kissed her. Right there, in the middle of the rain, in the middle of 1,000 heartbeats, he kissed her like she was life itself. The contract no longer mattered. The money didn't matter. Their past didn't matter. Only the fierce, unstoppable love blooming between two broken souls who had finally found their missing piece. And this time, Zara didn't run. This time, she chose him too. Forever. 6 months later, Charles organized a grand party. Not for the company, not for status, but to introduce Zara as the true Mrs. Robert to the world. Many elite guests sneered at Zara's humble background. Some whispered that she wasn't good enough for a billionaire. Charles heard every ugly word. He stood proudly before them, pulling Zara close, his voice booming. My wife isn't from wealth. She's not from power, but she's richer in kindness, loyalty, and love than any of you ever will be. She is my heart, my soul, my future. And if anyone dares disrespect her again, they will have to answer to me and to the world I'm going to build in her honor. The room went silent. Tears ran down Zara's cheeks. For the first time, she felt seen. Not for her beauty, not for her money, but for her soul. That night, Charles and Zara danced under the stars. No contracts, no doubts. Only a love pure enough to shatter the chains of hate, racism, and cruelty forever. Their story whispered through the elite circles. Love doesn't ask where you come from, only where you're willing to go together. Love knows no status, no race, no prejudice. True love sees the heart, and when it does, it creates a world more beautiful than gold.